Happy Earth Day.
Hi, Ralph. Happy Earth Day. I have to admit that I'm a little nervous about this conversation uh, and the potential for asking the wrong question and getting home and flipping the light switch and having him had already gone, get that guy in Garden Street, knock it down.
It's been known to happen. Actually,
So
the reason
I want to beg forgiveness from the very start for anything I say wrong and pray that when I get home, the electricity works. I think it's fair to say we have a planet that's a little bit ill right now, and we could argue that there's a lot of different medications it could use. Probably the only place we would come to agreement maybe is on decarbonization, a significant one, right? Maybe that's the medicine we could all agree is necessary. I wonder what that means for you, a company that has existed, for decades, an industry that existed for a century or more because of carbon and the ability to burn carbon. And I started thinking about that. So that's just one part of your problem, but your business too. You have the air conditioning on in the office. You've got windows that are drafty, paper to buy, all of that stuff. So how do you work as a business toward decarbonization when you're not just thinking about you, but you're thinking about the entire community?
Yes, so decarbonization can come in two forms. One is just not emitting carbon compounds, primarily carbon dioxide, but methane as well. Sadly, we're not doing a good enough job about avoiding those emissions as a planet. So I do fear that eventually we're going to have to talk about removing carbon from the atmosphere. We're not focused on that as a company. For us, decarbonization has been some very tangible steps. We have shut down 4,000 megawatts of fossil fuel plants, coal, natural gas, even some old oil burners. We sold, so this is not really decarbonizing, the rest of our natural gas plants. So they're still running, but we just said, okay, we're not going to play that role. And we have been working with our customers to make their use of energy more efficient so that they have the same amount of comfort and the same lifestyle that they want, but burn less natural gas and use less electricity. And all of that's important because the science is very clear. The planet has a carbon budget, and we're pushing the limits of that budget. And unfortunately, when you put carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it tends to stay there for centuries. So decarbonization has many, many forms. Obviously, I come at it from the energy point of view, but there are smarter people than me that can come at it from the transportation point of view, from the agricultural point of view. And that's what's so great about this whole challenge is that there are a lot of smart people in the world who can help us tackle it.
And on a short time frame.
We should have started yesterday. I can remember back in the 1980s listening to Professor Hansen talk about the need to react to climate change. The only thing the science has gotten wrong about climate change is the fact that it's happening faster than we predicted.
So let's talk about one piece of that because, right, Earth Day's been around for a long time, for 4 decades now, I think. You mentioned listening in the 80s about this, so 3 decades ago. I think that's 3 decades ago. Time moves faster, right?
I think it's 2020, so that might
and yet we're still having the conversation, and it's growing in urgency. And you talked about consumers and helping consumers use less energy, but I see us talking about it and also at the same time sort of not necessarily making the best decisions, right? And I think about this as a business person, a very hot topic being work from home, for example, right? Suddenly I think about that not only in terms of, my employees, but what does it mean to heat and light 1,000 homes versus one a LEED certified building that everyone comes to during the day? So how do we get, like, every new opportunity culturally seems to put us back half step?
Yeah, so the challenge is one of what economists call externalities. I think if we're sitting around a dinner table, it's long-term versus short-termism. Look, normally, PSEG has customers who are past the 30-day point where they owe us $150 million. Today, that number stands at $500 million. I mean, to deny the socioeconomic dislocation caused by a variety of factors, COVID being among them for certain people, is to put one's head in the sand. So here I come and say we need to act on climate change, because if we don't, then in 30 or 40 years, high value beachfront homes are going to be underwater. Well, I'm sorry, Ralph. I'm worried about paying my rent and my mortgage. And those are two extremes. Obviously, there's a whole big part of the population that's paying their rent and doesn't own beachfront property. So the issue is, how do you get people to focus on conservation, energy efficiency? Some of us are old enough to remember President Jimmy Carter talking about that in front of a fireplace. Some of us are old enough to remember can't wait to get our driver's license, and we ended up waiting on gas lines. So the notion of being more efficient as an economy has been around for many decades to come. But what the economists will tell you is that it is a battle of long-termism versus short-termism. If I have a disposable dollar and I'm a university president, I may not invest it in a more efficient boiler. I may invest it in a fancy lab so I can attract that chemistry professor. If I'm a hospital president and I have a disposable dollar, I'm not going to invest it on more efficient lighting systems. I'm going to invest it on medical equipment. And the list goes on and on and on. So it's the responsibility of some of us, through creativity, by making the economic proposition so compelling that we pull in that long-term benefit to the nearer term. And that's what happens with LED light bulbs. That's what happens with programmable thermostats. And we're trying to get that message out.
And are we adopting them fast enough?
So the answer is no. I mean, there's a whole bunch of untapped, economically wise decisions that could be made from an energy efficiency point of view that people don't make. Now, they'll challenge me and say, well, wait a minute, what's economically wise purely from a spreadsheet doesn't take into account, I'm going to sound like a broken record, this long-termism versus short-termism. So there are opportunity costs that I forego when I don't make that decision. So yes, there's a much more efficient dishwasher or washing machine or refrigerator, but that extra $300 I need for something else. So we're trying to work with regulators to provide customers with universal access and the ability to make that decision without sacrificing the other aspects of their household budget that might come at risk.
I think it's a hard thing, right? There's not only our immediate budgets, but sometimes the things we think are appropriate or increase sustainability or energy efficiency turn out not to be the case, right? So at Inc., we just finished a story about how to remove the 6.6 gigatons of carbon in the atmosphere that we need to by 2050. And what we did was we selected a set of pathways and actually did the math to deduct how much would have to be achieved, and looked at businesses, startups, some of them, that were emblematic of those pathways. And then because when you create content, you sprinkle other fun little things around. And one came down to something that certainly impacts you, and that's electric vehicles. There's a significant argument, I'm not going to take one side or the other, but there's a significant argument to be made that the conversion and the carbon debt of mining batteries, the conversion of our fuel system from gasoline, internal combustion engine, to electric, the cost of the grid creation that's necessary for that is worse than the cure. And ultimately that we might be better off, say, with hybrid vehicles for a really long time before electric vehicles make sense. How do you deal with that? How does that not keep you up at night? How do you know you're making the right decisions?
Well, that is a great question, Scott. Look, my entire life, I've seen what are called life cycle analyses, right? I mean, I remember when we first had children, we debated washing diapers versus buying disposable diapers, and what's the life cycle effect of that? And that debate rages on today between renewable energy and nuclear power. And here, maybe I'm guilty of short-termism. I worry about the fact that life cycle analysis are fraught with assumptions. Do you take it just to the manufacturing? Do you take it to the original commodity that's the feedstock and the mining? So I tend to take it to the direct impact that we realize today. And that does make me blind to the issues that you talked about. The bigger issue I thought you were going to mention in terms of electric vehicles is just the thermodynamic efficiency of taking a fuel, converting it to electricity, then losing some of that as you go across the wires, and then turning it into a motor versus just putting that fuel right in the vehicle. Turns out motors are so efficient that if you do that analysis, which stops well short of going way upstream as you rightfully suggested, electric vehicles are a much friendlier carbon alternative than burning gasoline. Now, can you do certain things to mitigate some of that maybe get at your issue? Sure. Corporate average fuel economy standards, which is what the president's advocating. That would be helpful without necessarily going all the way to electric vehicles. Hybrid would be a great example of that as well. So I realize I punted on your question. I didn't give you a definitive answer, but I just worry about if we get caught up in whose assumptions are right and how far back I want to go to modify what the outcome is, that we don't take any action. And that certainly is the wrong outcome.
I mean, sometimes I just think that, the real carbon issue is us as a life form, and maybe we're not sustainable.
Well, there is a population issue, right?
That's true too. So you've joined. This is not something obviously one does alone, and you've joined forces with the UN in the race to zero. What does that mean practically for a company? Right, we're mindful of the fact that you're the head of a publicly traded company. You have to be profitable, or the street is not going to be very happy with you. Well, what does it mean, and how does it help you?
Yeah, so we did join the Race to Zero, and there's a subcomponent of the Race to Zero that we specifically belong to, which has a lot more branding appeal, I'm told by people who pay attention to these things, and that's called Business Ambition for 1.5 degrees C. It's a mouthful. And the reason why they tell me that that's a much more attractive way to describe it is that Race to Zero could lead people to the mistaken assumption that we're going to drive the economy to a grinding halt. And it's quite the opposite, right? As we invest in electric vehicles, as we invest in more efficient systems, that's infrastructure that needs to be replaced and infrastructure that needs to be built and installed. And those are huge opportunities. I tend to think of the hardware side of it, but there's important software components to it that manages that infrastructure. Anyway, to get to your specific question, Business Ambition for 1.5 degrees C looks at what's called Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions. Scope 1 is what comes out of the smokestacks of the power plants we run. Scope 2 is what happens because of the fact that we tend to operate a system and we indirectly emit stuff. We drive cars to fix problems on the grid. Those are going to be a walk in the park for us to fix. Well, first of all, we're not emitting carbon from any of our power plants anymore. We run nuclear plants and we'll be running offshore wind plants. Scope 2 will be pretty easy, except for this darn law of physics that says whenever you transport electricity across a wire, you have losses. And as long as those wires are connected to a system that's not perfectly carbon-free, we're going to have to offset those losses primarily through electrification of vehicles. The big challenge for us in Business Ambition is what's called Scope 3. And those are the emissions that result from our suppliers or our customers making use of our natural gas. So we're going to have to do several things to bring that down. First of all, we're going to have to get people to stop using as much natural gas as they use. That might be through more efficient boilers, or it might be through electrifying their natural gas stovetops and their heating systems. In addition to that, we're going to have to reduce the intensity of the carbon in our natural gas. That'll probably be in the form of hydrogen dilution or in the form of renewable natural gas. But that's going to be where our biggest challenge is, and we're going to have to finalize that by September of 2023 to be certified by the United Nations as somebody that is indeed consistent with that 1.5 degrees C rise.
And again, this is where I was going to be worried about my lights being turned off. But until you made that conversion away from fossil fuel powered plants, I think you were one of the top 50 maybe producers of carbon affluence in the economy in the United States?
I have no doubt that we were. I don't know the exact number. Maybe I knew it once upon a time and I tried to wipe it from my mind. But we were consistently throughout our history, because of our emphasis on nuclear, well, not throughout our history, since the 80s, at half of the national average of carbon intensity. And now, but for a tiny little plant that we have in Hawaii that we have to do something about, we are a zero carbon emitter from the power generation side. And we are among the top 10 generators of electricity in the country. So that's a track record that I'm pretty proud of.
That's a good one to go out on your retirement, right?
Yeah,
that's terrific. So you have the UN as a partner and maybe 5,000 other companies who've participated, right, in Race to Zero. You also partner, say, here in New Jersey with the federal government, with the state government, county governments, municipal governments. I love my home state, but that has got to be one complicated mess.
It is. I mean, there's so much of federal and state policy that affects the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. I'll give you, for instance, we spend $3 billion a year on infrastructure improvements. And yet the number one thing we ought to be doing from a climate and reliability point of view is energy efficiency. And over the last 10 years, the average expenditure that we were allowed to make in energy efficiency was $30 million. I mean, that's 2 orders of magnitude for what should be our number one priority. Now, we recently won some debates in the regulatory world that allowed us to increase that by an order of magnitude. So we're now running at $300 million a year, but we're still an order of magnitude below our overall capital expenditures. Now, the reason why we're put in that position are not wholly illogical. The reason is that energy efficiency and the activities that produce that are not natural monopoly services. Any one of us can go out and buy an LED light bulb. You don't need us to do it. But the market imperfections that prohibit people from doing that are so clear that we've gradually started wearing down the debate that we shouldn't be a participant because it's not a natural monopoly service by being able to do that for lower income households, hospitals, public facilities, where either the credit risk is too high or the availability of capital is non-existent, to help provide universal access to what should be something that people do on their own but don't do on their own. So navigating that is a challenge, but hey, that's what gets us up in the morning.
And I should say part of your mission actually is to democratize access to energy, right? I mean, you mentioned it briefly, but more significantly, it's a serious issue.
It is a very serious issue. New Jersey last year spent $700 million subsidizing rooftop solar. If you own rooftop solar, I congratulate you. You made a wise economic decision. But you're probably about 40% above the average household income of New Jerseyans. And you're probably above 60% of the average household income of Americans. And that's who subsidizes you. We used to have grant programs in New Jersey on energy efficiency. I actually tested one of those grant programs once when our washer dryer died and we went to an appliance store. And the salesman told us that if we bought this device instead of that device, handed us a one-page sheet of paper, said PSEG will refund you $100. He obviously didn't know who I was, and I didn't think it was important to tell him. But it is absurd that customers in Patterson, in Camden, in Newark should subsidize Ralph Izzo for buying something that he can absolutely afford. So we're trying to reverse the regressivity of these good programs. Don't get me wrong, I'm not being critical of renewable energy or energy efficiency, quite the opposite. But we're trying to make the subsidization, which is needed to correct for these market distortions, more rational, so that Ralph Izzo isn't subsidized, but people who are having trouble paying their bills are the ones who get subsidized.
It's a noble thing that doesn't immediately come to mind when you think about running business. Likewise, the idea that you would do the most good by having much less business, right? How does that unfold every day, right? For you, where you actually, we would be better off, but we would do more good. Our ESG ratings would be better if we were worse at what we did, less successful at what we did.
No. It would be. I would be doing my shareholders a grave injustice if I left you with the mistaken impression that I'm being saintly in doing that. No. It's very simple. So we can lower a customer's bill and enrich our shareholders at the same time. There's a loser in this. It's not pixie dust. The loser is the fuel company who otherwise would have had to mine coal or frack for natural gas or mine for uranium-238, 235. That is a significant part of our cost structure. So if you use one less unit of energy and I save on my fuel costs, but I don't pass all of that savings on to you, then my shareholder can win and you can win. Now, the catch there is if you went out and bought that device yourself, the LED light bulb, you would get all of the savings. And you should, because I'm not in the middle of that transaction. But if I'm going to be in the middle of that transaction, I'm going to skim some of your savings. And that's how my shareholder makes money. But I think that's fair. I don't think I'm being evil by doing that.
No, I think that's the way it works here, at least, or should in America. Speaking of nations, you attended COP26 COP26, um, and I get the sense that you're actually quite optimistic about things. I mean, it's grave. I left my phone over there, but we have a Slack channel at work where AP Wire stuff comes up, and I just as I was walking up here looked at this story, and it was a report from the AP saying, climate worse, worse faster, and the photograph was like incineration of California, basically, right? It was very dire looking, could lead you to believe that we're in the middle of the worst. I get the sense that you don't think that you're more optimistic.
I am. My only regret about going to COP26 was that I didn't go to COP1 through 25. It was a phenomenal experience. First of all, if you haven't been to Edinburgh and Glasgow, go. They are the kindest, most warm-hearted, pleasant people I've ever met. And it's always raining. I don't know how they do it. There's something in the food or the coffee. But no, what we found there was that there's about 1,000 people who are involved in the negotiation, but there are 30 or 40,000 people at the conference. And basically, people were saying, we're not waiting for government. We have an issue here, and we have to move on it. And some of those people were just sort of rampaging in the street, but many of them were business folks from financial services, from the tech community, from the energy community. And it was exciting to see all the things that can and are being done. It was also helpful for me to understand some of the red herrings that are raised in the policy circles in America. Some of those are, well, unless the developing world does more, why should we? There's part of the developing world that's worried about potable water and healthcare delivery. So asking them to invest in highly expensive photovoltaic cells is a little bit disingenuous on our part. Also, you'll hear a lot about, well, China's not going to be net zero until 2060. China is going to eat our lunch. While they're pledging to be net zero by 2060, they are number one in the world in solar installations. They are number one in the world in nuclear installations. They are number one in the world in the electrification of mass transit. And they are number one in the world in the building of mass transit. They are building an economy for the future, and we cannot stand by and let that happen. So the perspective that I gained from that was extremely powerful in my conversations in Washington with people who still choose to ignore me, but nonetheless, we'll keep at it.
Running a business media company, one of the things I'm very proud of is actually seeing how business and business leaders lead this conversation even more than government. And I think ultimately that will be our salvation if we have one. Will be business, both big like yours and small like some of the founders here in this room and elsewhere in the tech community. How do you imagine working with the tech community and solving some of the problems that we face?
Well, Scott, so we've really enjoyed the relationship with Tech United. 2 years ago, we started this challenge and we asked people for help in energy efficiency. We have a company now that's going through a series of steps to validate a window film that we think can be applied in our energy efficiency programs. Last year, we focused on transportation, and there was a company that came forward with ways to help charge electric batteries on bicycles. This year, we've decided to open it up more broadly to this issue of decarbonization rather than focusing people to one place or another. Are there ways that we're using fossil fuels now that we can completely change and not use fossil fuels? Are there ways to reduce the amount of carbon that's using up the carbon budget? So we've broadened it because, quite candidly, I love our company, and we have 12,000 employees who work real hard every day, but they tend to focus on reliability, doing things that we did yesterday a little bit better. And I just think the tech community can make quicker, bigger step changes for us.
We all appreciate that you focus on reliability every day, and we'll get to the BetterPlanet challenge again in just 1 second. But it's interesting to me also to see at a time when businesses, the progressivity in businesses is fascinating to me, right? So we have businesses now leading the conversation on climate change. We have businesses that used to be incredibly proprietary, very viciously protective of their IP and the way they did things, now working more readily with small companies, individual founders, someone with a solution like window film or pressure plates on the road to generate electricity or what have you. How did that change happen for you? When did you recognize that it was necessary and not to, sort of put your arms around your pile of coal and keep going.
Well, so maybe I'm going to come across as a little schizophrenic here. We were joking earlier that if Alexander Graham Bell woke up today, he would think that he was asleep for many millennia, given the changes. Whereas if Thomas Edison woke up today, he would think he just got up from an afternoon nap, right? Because you still see those wooden poles in the street and things of that nature. So while visibly the grid and much of it looks very much like it used to be, we have made tremendous changes in terms of the digitization of the grid, the artificial intelligence we apply to predictive maintenance of our facilities, the advanced metering that we're beginning to install so that we can diagnose consumption in the household much better. So there have been technical changes all along. However, we tend to not put ourselves in the bleeding edge, right? We do ask people who bring technological innovation to us, say, okay, where have you tried it before? Can we pilot it? So, and that's because of the schizophrenia around reliability, but wanting to make progress.
But in a lot of ways, I imagine New Jersey is a pretty terrific incubator for such things, given its density and the diversity of population where people live.
Highly educated population in the middle of media centers,
cities and farms and all of that stuff. Are there wind opportunity offshore, for example, another? So I imagine being located here and doing your business here provides some interesting opportunity to solve problems more broadly.
It does. But the one head scratcher for us has been, if you look at characteristics that would lend themselves to electric vehicle penetration, you'd want short commuting distances. Sadly, you'd still want high per capita income given the cost of electric vehicles. You'd want some uncertainty and maybe even negative components of air quality. And I just described New Jersey, yet we lag. I think we're number 7 or number 8 in the nation in terms of electric vehicle penetration. And that surprises me. I mean, we lag California, we lag Massachusetts, we lag Georgia. I don't mean to offend people if you're from Georgia, but that's not satisfactory to me. And sadly, it appears to be this notion of range phobia, right? Do we have the infrastructure to help people be comfortable buying an electric vehicle? And what those other states did that we didn't do is they basically said to utilities, we want you to build the infrastructure. And New Jersey's been a little bit slow to do that. So thank you for being here, and please participate in the challenge.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Rob.